This is Power Athlete Radio. With your hosts, Denny K, Professor Booty, and the Luke Summers. And now, toes forward, hips locked, shoulders set, and retract those scapulars. It's time for some knowledge bombs.
Thanks for tuning into Power Athlete Radio. One of our favorite guests, Robb Wolf, is back. This week he entertains questions about cholesterol, the fermented food craze, and killing animals with primitive tools. Here are our latest 22 Jack Street updates, Luke's submission of the term bulklemia to Webster's dictionary, and Robb's advice about leaning and gaining that probably would have been helpful about 15 weeks ago. Finally, Robb reminds us that he is a better person than us in nearly every conceivable way by casually mentioning that he holds a world record. To find out what, you'll have to stay tuned. Here's a hint, it's not hot dog eating. This is episode 94 of Power Athlete Radio.
Power Athlete Nation, what's up? This is Denny. I'm here with the Power Athlete coaches for another exciting episode of the premier strength and conditioning podcast known as Power Athlete Radio.
Yeah.
Woo!
Yeah.
We're number one. Bad jokes, quotes from 80 movies, and what? We got relevant strength and conditioning talk.
Wow.
Joining us, returning guest, is Robb Wolf, the man. What's up, Robb?
Not too much. Just standing here in my underwear since Callie made me turn off the video. So
Me too.
immediately after that, I stripped.
Oh,
Once you let the boys out and they can play, it kind of like your voice.
You can think better.
It's a little bit more smooth, right?
Well,
Robb,
if you
can
air
pop
tune
on that
it,
video any time now if you want. Now that you're pantsless.
I'll drop it in every once in a while, kind of like Fight Club style, where people will be like, "Oh God," and they don't really know what happened. So yeah.
Well, now that Robbie's up to his fighting weight of 172 pounds or right around 7-8% body fat, it might be actually kind of exciting to see.
We'll see.
I'm a little upset that I don't get a morning selfie of Robb in the bathroom.
Well, usually my data limit is taken up by John sending those to me. So I don't really have the opportunity to return the favor.
I was gonna say, just hope you're not on like a selfie group text with John, Luke, and text, because it's getting nasty as of recently.
Yeah, listen, let's hijack it and give a little Jack Street update. Because we are how long into this program? Are we 12 weeks? Yeah.
I feel like we've been on 12 weeks for 3 weeks now.
It's been a long time.
13 weeks, I think.
So for people who don't know, maybe this is their very first episode listening, which would be crazy. John, Callie, and I, along with Tex and two other of our interns, Bobby and Levi, and I guess Ashley as well, my girlfriend, are on a 20-week challenge, or 22 weeks, we're calling it 22 Jack Street, to either gain 20% or lose 20% of our 10% of our initial body or weigh-in. And what that ended up being for me was 25 pounds for me, Bobby. Tex has to put on 20 pounds. John has to lose 30 pounds-ish, right?
Yeah.
And then Callie had to lose 15
16,
pounds.
Yeah.
And then Packy, my girlfriend, had to put on 12 or 13 pounds.
Two.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, no shit.
But the big thing here is the change of training stimulus for us, in the sense that we're doing a lot of isolated stuff and working on some machines and cables, which is legit.
It is awesome.
So I waited.
Part of it started because a lot of these guys, and Robb will identify a little with this, kind of, grew up in the training deal in terms of like Luke, like sport performance for football, and then got into CrossFit, and functional movements performed at high intensity was really the mode. And I remember talking about how to put on muscle mass, and when we go to the seminars, whenever we start talking about bodybuilding, people always love to poo-hoo it, and I'm like this. I'm like, I know it's weird getting up there and posing in a set of fucking
what I'm standing in.
I was going to say the type of underwear that Robb Wolf wears on a Saturday night, painting themselves up with with skin dye and getting up in front of other strange narcissistic people and having them cheer. But one thing that bodybuilders have done very well is they have worked to create larger human beings, and they've done it better than anybody. So a little focused hypertrophy work, and if you have a 135-pound kid that wants to be 160 pounds, you better know the fuck a little bit about hypertrophy and how to put it on and take a page from the bodybuilding. So these guys had never done any classic bodybuilding consistently. So we went over and went to a bodybuilding gym and joined up that has leg extensions, hamstring curls, and cables, and all the other fucking accoutrements that are that you wouldn't find at our gym. So we've been doing this program, and it's pretty interesting to see just the physical changes both in Luke and Callie. I don't get to see Tex on a regular basis, so I only get to look at his MyFitnessPal and see how he's doing. Yeah,
so I weighed in at 218 initial weigh-in, and I've been on a standing call with Tex and Bobby, who are also bulking. 218, I'm up to 238, 12 weeks in.
Nice.
Damn.
And then what do we got? Callie, where are you at?
I started at 151. I'm at 138 right now.
Mm-hmm. And then John, John, where are you at?
I started at 294, and I'm in the high 280s.
Like what's that mean? 294?
No, I'm in the high 288. So I've lost 6 pounds.
So you.
It's complicated. And then Tex.
But the better part is I leaned out and have lost body fat.
Yeah, for sure.
I think I've gained muscle, which I can't really figure out because I'm not eating enough calories to put on muscle. And yeah, that's when I hit you up, and I'm like, I think my blood sugar is high, is keeping weight on me. And so I was like, maybe I need to put more fiber, maybe just eating. But part of the other thing too with this, and what people are going to laugh about, is we all selected different diets. Mm-hmm. So Luke and Bobby and Tex are following the bulking protocol, which is like 20 calories per pound of body weight, and they're doing it's basically isocaloric, so it's a 33
on hard training days.
On training days, and then the off days it's a ketogenic deal with constant calories. And then for me, I'm doing I'm doing the anabolic diet, so I've been doing 5 days, obviously ketogenic, and then a carb refeed on the weekends, and Callie has been doing a 40-30-30 weighted measure.
And just now I'm transitioning, actually increasing my calories.
Yeah, she was at like 900 calories a day?
No way. I was between like 1,200 and 1,400, and now I'm increasing them so I won't lose any more muscle, because I've lost some muscle.
What's interesting, and this is what I've noticed at least about the anabolic diet and doing this, is I've lost body fat, pretty good amount of body fat, but haven't necessarily lost scale weight. So I mean, there's something to training in that like that anabolic diet. I mean, there's something really interesting with it. So I actually just got hit on a question on the carb backloading and the carb night, so I had to read those books because I didn't know enough about them. It turns out that the carb night's actually kind of one of the adaptations of Morrow's program. So we had Morrow on the podcast, and Rob and I talked about this for a long time, but and then the best is Doc Parsley has also been on this ketogenic deal, and when I talked to him about it, he's like, man, maybe that's the way I should go. So I think I got Parsley going and do the carb refeeds anabolic style. So
what one question, then a comment. Callie, how many grams of protein were you doing when you were at this low ebb of the calorie intake?
I was doing 30% from protein, so I whatever that comes out to be.
How many calories were you eating?
About 1,400.
So 30% would be roughly.
Yeah, you do the math.
450 calories.
32.
Yeah, about 100.
Yeah, that's probably like a little on the low end. I'm definitely like, I think part of it too is just as a result of sort of my lifestyle now. I bike to work, and I think that has eaten away a little bit at the muscle, and I can't
Yeah, you're not as strong as you used to be.
No, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you're going to calorie restrict someone pretty aggressively, if there's ever a time, I think there's 2 times when you could go really, really aggressively on high protein intake, like a pubescent kid who's, completely unadapted. They're just going to grow.
Like Callie's boyfriend?
Like basically Callie's boyfriend. Or if...
2 years younger.
Oh, nice. Good for you, girl.
Yeah.
The other side is if somebody is really calorie restricted, like probably the most effective way of fat loss is a protein sparing modified fast, where the huge amounts of protein, like upwards of a 1.5 grams per pound of body weight, sometimes is how high these things go, and then some fibrous, twiggy stuff, and then no added fat. And this is a short-term run. Like, you're not going to be able to run this thing a long time, but you can get some really shocking body fat loss due to the severe caloric deficit. But you tend to maintain muscle mass, like you throw in a lot of branched chain amino acids, strength train, hitting each body part, each main muscle group upwards of 3 times a week. Not huge volume, but just enough stimulus so that you're pushing that catabolic signaling from the low calorie intake, pushing it away as much as possible. So yeah, the 100 grams protein, I'm not surprised that plus calorie restriction would peel some muscle mass off you.
Yeah, and it has, but the reason I kind of came up with that split is because I would say that I was eating way too much protein and fat before and very, very few carbs. And so I wanted to do something, I wanted to have a macro split that was different and was going to help me just, if I was going to be in caloric restriction, I wanted something, that was outside of the norm. I had already I was already super conscious of what I was eating, but I was more on the end of I haven't earned my carbs. I always sort of felt that way. Well, the fact of the matter is that bodybuilder training, when you're doing 3-hour-long sessions, you're doing steady state cardio or you're biking to work or whatever, I could not function for 22 weeks or as far as I have and lost the weight without that 40% carbs. And I'm going to start making the transition to a little bit more fat and protein and fewer carbs, but I think that's sort of what I needed. I don't know if that makes sense to you from a scientific standpoint.
I would keep the protein high and the carbs where you can get your performance, and then actually keep the fat relatively low.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, personally, yeah.
For me, what I was doing was I bumped up the protein over I think I was eating somewhere around 350, 375 grams of protein. And that was part of that, gluconeogenesis where it was converting in. So it's I was getting glucose from all the protein and then eating the fat. And then what's nice is then you go, and then on Saturday I would get up and I would flip it over and do a 50% carb, 25 protein, 25 fat.
Yeah. And
I would do that. And the crazy part is on Saturday night before I was going to bed, I could see veins from my arm into my shoulder, into my neck, and I could see them in my shins and my
Got that Wolverine vein.
It was fucking crazy. I was brushing my teeth, and Kate was like, "You have a vein in your trap."
Mm-hmm. That's a Wolverine vein.
I was like, "Well, that's pretty good."
But that's part of the ABF model. Always be flexing.
And then, and then I woke up the next morning, and I was like, you know what? If it works, let me try it again. So I carved up again, and was smooth as shit before I went to bed, and smooth. So I realized for me, the sweet spot is a 1 day, and that's part of Morrow's deal where you kind of tweak it.
Yeah.
Now, let's preface this with the programming and whatever we're doing very specific for this type of stuff. I had to cut my volume back to squat 1 day, bench 1 day, pull 1 day, and then accessory on a 4th day because I was trying to squat twice and pull twice to do our normal train and was absolutely fucking torched.
Yeah, and I'm bumping it up at least for the past 4 or 5 weeks. It's been pretty much 6 days a week, which I've never really trained 6 days a week.
Yeah.
So it's trying to get more consistent exposure.
So I have a quick question for you, Rob, just before we get off more towards training or whatever. But when people are going through these different diet changes and they're trying to alter their diet to either gain or lose or, whatever it is, how long of a period of time do you, when you make these adjustments, how long do you suggest that they implement them for before they start tinkering with it? Because people will, obviously we're such an instant gratification sort of, demographic. And so, how long do you suggest, hey, this is when you're going to start to see the changes occurring due to the new split or whatever?
Oh, man, it's kind of a tough question. I mean, it depends on what the person is doing. I would say at least a month, though, and that seems like a pretty good rule of thumb, although I don't know who this thumb guy is, but that he seems to be popular. But if we
Rob, you know what the rule of thumb is, right?
I do.
Boondock Saints, bro.
Tell me, rhetoric, brother.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
It's actually the idea was that in old time England you could beat your wife as long as it was not
with the stick. It was not larger than a thumb.
Anyone who's seen Boondock Saints.
So wider than your thumb, so it's,
That's a great scene.
It's still legal. That's what my boyfriend said. Oh, okay.
Well, but I selfishly brought this up because I have a debate. I'm gonna start a debate right now.
Oh.
So we're 12 weeks into this thing, and I'm convinced that if you take a hypo or hypercaloric approach to a weight change, like a drastic change like we've done, I'm saying that it is harder to day in and day out eat more than it is to eat less and be
You
hungry.
are such a little bitch.
I completely
You have
agree.
no fucking
I totally agree.
I'll totally agree. It is
Because the next meal is
100%.
always there.
It is 100% harder to gain the weight. Callie is.
Calorie.
I'm going to start calling her Calorie.
Well, my nickname, Tex has always called me K-Cal, which I always love. Yeah.
Energy.
Well, I think it's harder. No, and I'll preface it with this. If so, there's like this. When we were young football players, there was something that we called like the red zone of weight gain, which is like, okay, hey, like I stuff myself, I eat all the time, and I'm at this level. Like let's say it was, and I remember when I went to college, I was 255 pounds, and I had to make it to 280 the next year. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm eating every meal till I'm sick. How the fuck am I going to put on this extra weight? And being able to make that jump to 280 was absolutely terrible. It was like shakes on the side of the bed. I mean, we were doing like a ton of bodybuilding. I couldn't do anything that like got my heart rate up, so we'd go out and sprint, and I would try to rest. And I ended up being able to put that weight on. And then I remember like the jump to 300 was like another one. And then when I got up that next year, after my rookie year, where I got up into like the 320s and plus, and that was a fucking jump. But I remember, like once you've been at that weight and then you cut back down, like I think it's easier to get back. But like getting into the red zone, which is that
There are
I guess
so many factors there.
But specifically, I'm not talking about the actual results of the work. I'm talking about the actual work that goes into it. Because I'm experiencing something I've coined as movement-induced bulklemia, where I've eaten so much and I get up to do something and I actually start to puke a little bit because I'm so fucking full. And then what's great is 2 hours later, I have to fucking eat again. And I'm not even close to hungry.
I
have no pity for being hungry.
Part of the thing when you're in the bulk is
in the bulk, bro.
Well, when you're in the bulk, and I always think about like guys that like a la Ripto and like some of like the guys that like Zelensky and those guys that tried to do the bulk and ran into problems. The problem is they were doing like 3 sets of 5, or they were doing something like fucking small off where all they had to do it. Like you have to do something that's like, you got to throw some machines in, you got to get some volume, because if you're just under the squat rack for 50 fucking sets, like it's not going to work. So I think like throwing in the extra hypertrophy work, doing that.
I want to hear Robb's experience though, because Robb, because you've had to probably gain and lose for fights,
Robb
right?
had his mass gain, dude. Robb's got a great mass gain story.
Oh God, which one do you want? I mean, I competed in powerlifting in my youth from 165 pounds up to 198 pounds. I did the 198 class once, and it was absolutely miserable. And
how tall are you?
I'm 5'9", and I'm not I tend to just be kind of wiry. Like I'm not real big framed. Like I'll put on some muscle mass. And the bugger for me, both in jiu-jitsu and when I was doing powerlifting, my sweet spot is about 172 pounds, which is kind of too heavy. So for
flip on that video and prove it, Robb. I'm just kidding.
Just a little bit. So it's kind of sucked in a way because particularly for doing jiu-jitsu now, I either need to really get in and eat to bump up to that 181 class, and I have to. And 181 is weighing in with a gi, and so it's actually being like 178, and you basically weigh in immediately before you fight, and so you've got to legitimately be the weight that you are. And for that context, compared to MMA, it doesn't make sense to me to weight cut. Or my other option, if I want to fight at 165, then I've got to be like 162, which isn't super appealing either because I kind of fight for every little scrap of muscle that I've had. But when I went up to the 188 class. 181 wasn't super hard for me to get to. It was a decent amount of work, but it wasn't terrible, and I could kind of, I would slide back down to about 175 when I wasn't actively trying to compete. But that 198 deal, like I had shakes all the time, and this is back a long time ago, probably before virtually everybody on this podcast besides John was born, actually. But I would make a shake out of rice and tuna fish and powdered milk.
My God.
Yeah.
Rob, that is heinous.
Yeah, that's what you got to do to bulk.
No.
You are not going to do that. You got a Matador like
let's
3
prep
times a
it
week.
this, right? So there was a time before when supplements, and Rob will remember this day. I remember my first weight gainer shake that Zangus gave me was in a 5-pound sack.
Yeah.
And I came home, and the stuff was so fucking putrid tasting, I had to plug my nose,
chew it,
mix it with water, ice, peanut butter. I would put anything I could, and you would fucking down this.
Like
and if I smelled it, I would throw up. It was so fucking bad.
Yeah.
Like, and so like the idea of like doing like tuna fish milk and that type of stuff is
digestible.
Is
That's
what
easy.
was actually probably more palatable than some of the protein
It's
supplements.
It's like
It was. Yeah. So I mean, it's it's at this point, and I wish I had thought about this stuff ages ago, but even then, the testing labs weren't really available. At this point, if somebody wants to do a mass gain, like I really feel like it has to be in the context of nearly perfect sleep, a really well-constructed program, and I would really recommend going and getting a full androgen profile,
Sure.
getting an ASI test, make sure your AM cortisol is good, PM cortisol is good, because if the androgen profile isn't there, for mass gain, I'm not a huge expert on this stuff, but you've got to have volume stimulus, a progressive overload, the caloric excess, and then you need the androgen profile to support growth. And there are a lot of people out there that are just burning the candle at both ends, and if the androgen profile really isn't amenable towards muscle gain, then you're just going to waste your time. You're going to get fat. Mass gain is a stressor. When you start getting under stress, you start generating more cortisol. The cortisol creates this pregnenolone steal situation where your testosterone goes down even more. And this is true for either men or women. So I think that if you're contemplating a mass gain, that's aggressive at all, it really behooves you to do some of this pre-validation. I hate the whole concept of hacks. This isn't a hack. This is just making sure it's like
I spent $250,000 to biohack myself now.
Exactly. Yeah. I spent $150 and got better results.
Yeah.
Well, I don't disagree with you.
This is information that would have been useful 12 weeks ago.
Well, you still have time.
Well, wait a minute. You have a healthy androgen profile.
I think.
I guess. I mean, just looking at you, I can tell. I mean, I have the ability to. Well,
I think though the smaller you are, especially Ashley has it the hardest because the smaller you are, and I think depending for her, she has to gain, and she just doesn't have.
She's really turning into the control group to test the program.
Okay.
She's like,
I'm out.
Yeah,
Can't
she's
do
basically out on the food, but she's doing the programming.
I think though that maybe
Dude,
Rob, there's some
to put on weight, and like this is the hard part, like for. Like you need a big fucking carrot, like the mass game, like somebody like we did it for a 22-week and like we have a deal. I mean, for me it was like lose your scholarship or put the weight on, like that type of shit. Like we'll force somebody to put it on, but just somebody who's like, oh, I'm a garage gym lifter and I want to put on 20 pounds.
Yeah,
it's fucking tough. But I mean, Callie's part of her deal is she like really wanted to make this big change, and it's easy, and I think people can like see that because like you got good results, and then all of a sudden you kind of got like, oh shit, I'm getting results, I'm gonna fucking go for it.
Yeah.
Which is nice, whereas Luke is just bloated all the time.
Yeah, but I look good.
Yeah, but poor Tex, hasn't Tex lost weight?
No, I'm plateaued at 205, and so here's the deal: Luke has been this heavy before. Bobby has been this heavy before. I've got to create this weight. This is the heaviest I've ever been.
They're 6 inches taller than you.
Tex, aren't you like 5'2" though?
What's that?
Like how tall are you? Like 5'5", 5'6"?
I wish. No, it's like more 5'8", depending on whether it's my high school football program or my driver's license.
All right, so we'll go with 5'9.5". Good.
Yeah.
And this could be an argument. Like that's a great point. Instead of a concerted, say like 20-week block, maybe you break this thing into 4 or 5 week blocks. Mm-hmm. And you make a push for like a 5-pound gain, and then you maintain, and then and then let it go 3, 4, 5 months.
The maintain thing is going to be the aggressive part. I think we're all on our way, but it's like the maintain thing's going to be hard. And all I do when I think of like trying to coast into the last few weeks is I get an image of Leonidas from 300 just saying like, hold. I swear.
No, I keep picturing Stallone in cliffhanger with like one finger, and he's like, "Don't drop her!" And he's like down, he's like holding the chick, and she's like, "Don't let me
It's
go!"
like 100%. I'm like, I just want to hold it. Come on.
Well,
End it.
See, but in the maintenance gig, you're going to backslide a little bit, but you make an aggregate gain. You go forward, 3 steps. You go back maybe 1, but it really you can really drop the volume of food that you're consuming, and you can kind of reestablish a set point there. I had a pretty big conversation with Stefan Guillenet and Dan Party, some really sharp dudes, and we're looking at this thing more from like just fat loss kind of story, but how do people become obese, which is clearly non-beneficial mass gain. But it's interesting. The body has a remarkable number of mechanisms that kick in to try to prevent you from gaining weight. Like it takes a while to break the metabolism to start gaining weight, and that works on both the obesity side and on the the hypertrophy side. And I think that there's a good argument for tackling this thing in a more graduated fashion. To go after it, get after the eating for like 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks, and then dial things back a little bit on the food. Keep the volume of training that you're doing comparatively high, and then give your body some time to maintain, and then push that thing up again.
Doesn't it kind of fuck you to always kind of stay in caloric deficit? I mean, like I know that for some people,
I live forever.
I'll tell you, the thing that I've really enjoyed about this is not feeling like I had to eat as much as I did. Like this has been kind of neat to actually kind of eat a smaller amount, and it's actually pretty gratifying to not feel like I was full all the time.
Right.
And then to like kind of portion, like go in and like dinner last night we cooked steaks, and I like ate half of the steak, and I was like, it's just so nice because I would feel compelled to eat that whole steak, and you know what? I got that other half of steak in the fridge for lunch.
So I went to get my favorite tacos last night. I got 3. Wasn't even hungry. I had to force feed myself 1.5 tacos.
Oh my God, your life is so hard.
It is. You have no idea. You start
first world problems.
You know what? Here's the thing. Here's why I don't have sympathy for Luke, because if it was just about mass gain, he would have just had the 3 tacos and then had like a mass gainer shake or whatever else. Shots of olive oil, whatever you need to get the calories. But you fucking love a taco, all right? And it's like
this guy does love a fucking taco.
You guys got
I love a
here?
fucking taco.
Are there tacos here?
Are there tacos here?
I didn't even finish this. I just wasn't on. I wasn't ready to eat. Last night I didn't even finish my caloric goal, but I didn't even finish a bowl of chips. That's how you know something was off.
Are you sick?
I'm not feeling good.
Rob, let's talk a little bit about.
Okay, I'm done.
Let's talk a little bit about, because we can't talk about 22
Well,
Jack Street.
I just wanted to ask Rob one question about
sure.
like you talked about set points. Can you get into like some like the leptin stuff? Because I think that's super fascinating. I think people don't really understand it. Like the leptin set point, and like with people, especially like you were talking about, like it's difficult for the body to get obese, but people do it very, very well. And then all of a sudden, when that leptin set point kind of works, and how long it takes to really reset that.
Oh man, I mean, I'm honestly not a huge expert on leptin. I mean, the fundamentals are that leptin is released by our fat mass. If we are leptin sensitive, then there's kind of a linear correlation between fat mass and the amount of leptin that's being released, and that leptin that's released will, if the signaling is occurring properly, then it tells us if you're hungry or if you're full. And this is some of the stuff that happens when we start overeating, is that initially we don't become leptin resistant. What we become is warm. You're sweating. You get this the decoupling proteins that are in our mitochondria flip on. So instead of this energy going to productive work and growth, the body temperature just goes up. And that's one of the first adaptations that occurs, just trying to bleed off excess energy, because this caloric excess is registering as a stress. And
Rob, we call it meat sweats.
Heat sweats, yeah.
No, meat sweats.
Sweats, okay. Or if you're Michael Moore, apparently it's called the Crisco sweats or something like that.
Oh God.
Yeah.
He is pretty disgusting.
So that's some of the early process, and then over the course of time, and I don't think we know for sure if it's an inflammatory response, and that makes sense because these uncoupling proteins, they produce a ton of reactive oxygen species. They tend to increase inflammatory biomarkers, and then this may then cause some sort of damage in the hypothalamus where we stop sensing leptin appropriately, and that's where the leptin dysregulation occurs. And this is, I think that there's an argument for a couple of different tactics on either a mass gain or a weight loss protocol. If we're in a mass gain protocol, I could make an argument for tackling the mass gain in shorter blocks and take a longer period of time, like instead of the 20-week dedicated block, you do 3 or 4 shorter blocks over the course of a year. And then even within that block, some days should be hypocaloric days and possibly severely hypocaloric days, because this will send enough of a stress signal to the body that the body is kind of like, hey, okay, the body is always more concerned about starvation than it is with overfeeding. Like overfeeding is a kind of a novel irritant to the body. It has ways of dealing with it, but starvation is the more concerning feature. And so if you have a day or two here and there where the caloric intake is dramatically different, then I think that we get some, then on the days when we're hypercaloric, I don't think we get as much of that uncoupling protein activity. It allows your digestion to kind of rest and reset. Fred Hatfield kind of figured this out with the zigzag diet back in the 80s. So I think there's some argument for tackling this in more punctuated pieces and also having more variability day to day. Now that becomes a little bit more of a pain in the balls for figuring out what your caloric intake needs to be. It's nice when you get this all dialed in. You're like, okay, I'm eating 5,000 calories a day, and you figure out how much chicken and rice and all the rest of that stuff that comes out to. But I think there's some argument for doing that. And similarly, in a weight loss fashion, multiple days of caloric restriction will start down-regulating our non-exercise activity. So where a person used to fidget and kind of move around, the person will become lethargic and kind of cold and sedentary. And so it makes an argument for, every couple of days to really pop the caloric intake up.
I've always been cold.
That will, maybe send a little bit of a signal to the body that we're not in overt starvation, so we don't need to be so thrifty with our calories.
Sure.
That was Morrow's deal when I did that. Started the anabolic diet. In '99 or 2000. His deal was like, you have to, you're going to be at these different deals. You have to stair step it up and down, and then like one day a week when you do your carb refeed, you got to fucking like go at it. Yeah, and I remember I was pretty consistent with the calories when I put the weight on, and then when I wanted to lean out. His whole deal was like, dude, we're going to keep you low, and you got to stay, kind of stair step, but like, I need you to go out, like, fast in the morning, like train, and then fast and like 6 o'clock at night. I want you just to go fucking hog wild. And I remember, like going out to this place and just fucking eating till like the cows come home. And I remember getting up and I had lost like 6 pounds like the next morning, and it was like, how the fuck did that happen? And, I think Rob and I had an offline conversation about this, about like the idea that, people make their best gains in training when they start a new program or the stimulus trains. Like we were training at that bodybuilder gym, and the week we joined it, they sold it to a new place and brought in all this new equipment, and all these old barnacles were all pissed off. And the guy asked me about it, and I was like, actually, this is going to be the best thing that happened in your life. And he's like, why is that? I'm like, well, you've done the same shit for 20 years. Now by just bringing in new machines, now we're going to, drive adaptation. I think Callie said the same thing to a guy.
Yeah.
And, of course, all the old barnacles left, which is good because now we don't have to fucking see them sticking around. But just by changing stimulus, and I remember Incledon especially telling me, he's like, when we've seen the most dramatic changes is when people do something that is so unlike, like Callie was, eating obviously a certain way, and now she's gone to a more balanced kind of, 40-30-30 macros and this, and she made great gains. Luke, on the other hand, in the same way, now has gone from now he's going to consistent calories, whereas Luke was a kind of a warrior dieter almost, where you wouldn't eat all day and then you'd go home and try to eat like 5,000 calories in one meal.
Someone's got to keep the lights on around here,
Oh God.
What?
It's a diva. All right.
So the moral of the story is now they've obviously changed what they've been doing, but the one thing which is actually just kind of interesting is that even if you kind of dump your calories down and you kind of play with it a little bit, if you keep the protein high, protein is very muscle sparing. And for me, what I've noticed is protein is almost the most important. I mean, it is the most important nutrient that I've found for muscle and body composition. So I think like if you really want to try to shed some body mass, you lower that protein down. If you want to like try to lose some body weight but keep the muscle mass up, you got to almost dial that protein up.
Oh, and John, here's the flip side of that. I completely agree. Here's the flip side of that, and it's it may be a little counterintuitive, but on a mass gain protocol, you could actually make a good argument to not have protein too high, and that's because protein is incredibly satiating.
Yeah.
So getting somebody from fat to lean, very high protein intake is great because it going back to the leptin and the neuroregulation of appetite and whatnot, if we consume a lot of protein, we get full very, very quickly. And this is maybe an argument, again, on the mass gain side, you want enough protein, but I suspect that the individual will find that they can eat more calories if the protein is at a moderate level versus a higher level. And clearly, you need enough to grow, but if there's a caloric excess, your body will be pretty crafty at allocating resources, and we're still talking about, probably like 3/4 of a gram of protein per pound of lean body mass or something like that. But I could possibly make an argument that some of the problems that folks have on a mass gain protocol, and I suspect that I did this in the past, was that I was so fixated on protein intake that I was actually sending an overly strong satiety signal that was very hard to overcome, whereas if my protein were more moderate, I could probably consume more total calories and get better progress all the way around.
Oh, it makes sense. I mean, I remember, and I was telling these guys when I was in college, I was, really, really struggled to keep body weight, and they used to weigh us, and I was telling, I think I told Luke the story, there was this place called Krusty's Pizza, and if you ordered after 10 o'clock, they would, it was like this whole pan of breadsticks and a pound of chicken wings for like $4.99 or $5. It was like basically they closed at 11. If you ordered at 10, they would just fucking all the shit that they didn't sell, they would just send out. So we would like wait and call them at like 9:58, and they'd be like, "Nope, can't do it yet. You got to wait 2 minutes." And I'd hang up and call them again, and then they would bring it over. And I ate that like 3-4 nights a week. And now that I would like tally up the calories, it had to be a 3,000 to 4,000 calorie meal, and I would eat that 3 or 4 nights a week on top of my other calories, and still not really gain weight. And I remember being like, man, like this is. I remember my girlfriend at the time just being like, fuck you. The fact that you're eating this right now and not gaining weight is unreal.
I swear John tells the story repeatedly just to torture me because he knows that I would...
She loves crusty pizza.
I would...
Whatever it was.
The thought of eating that
breadstick.
Stuff actually, and then Rob would appreciate this, the reason that I probably didn't gain a pound was because 20 minutes after I finished, it was a bad deal. It was like Robb Wolf on a whole loaf of whole bread.
Oh, God.
So, like, my goal is I want to film a whole series of, like, punking Robb Wolf where I just go around and slip gluten into his food and then videotape him. Like, the look on his face when Robb gets gluten dosed is awesome.
Just so long as I can take a crap in your nice new bathroom, then I'm fine. Because when I do a gluten dose bathroom run, like, you basically brick that thing over and get a priest and do an exorcism. That thing is fucking done.
Oh, my God. It is a nice bathroom.
What's that?
Tell me more.
Yeah. Luke's like, so what's different than any other day in my life?
More detail.
No, I mean, I've always been fascinated with the leptin stuff. I mean, that idea of signaling hunger, and I always thought that, like, the idea of, that we've been conditioned where it's like, you eat every 2 or 3 hours and you got to keep constant nutrient feeding. But I think that also kind of plays into a little bit of, do people actually know when they're hungry? I mean, Callie obviously knows when she's hungry. But,
everyone fucking knows when I'm hungry.
Yeah,
true. Callie's getting hungry again.
Getting hungry, and I always wonder if like it might benefit people a little bit to try
I'm fine
to do
now.
some fasting
When we first started this thing, I was fine, but I wanted to kind of segue, Rob. We were talking about trends. One of the trends that sort of like I think hit. With the rise of CrossFit and everything was just like the protein consumption. Everything was about meat and bacon. And one of the other trends that's sort of influencing people's diets right now is kombucha and the idea of eating fermented foods or drinking fermented, the byproduct of these fermented foods. Can you speak on that? Tell us of the legitimacy on gut health and whether it's possible to take it too far.
Oh man, it's that stuff is kind of the Wild West right now. There's a great website called the Human Gut Project, and there's this guy Jeff Leach who's a researcher, and he has lived in and among the Hadza in sub-Saharan Africa for a number of years, and has been collecting their poo and running it through PCR and checking out what type of strains of bacteria. And the dude actually did a fecal transplant from one of the Hadzas and is tracking all this stuff, and it's interesting. He makes the point that in these hunter-gatherer groups that he's seen, he doesn't see any of these, say, like lactobacillus and bifidum type organisms that are really usually touted as being healthful and beneficial in more westernized circles, because we consume things like yogurt and sauerkraut, and that's been kind of a acculturated adaptation to our food. It seems like this stuff is a net win, but honestly, like, it varies so much from person to person. A lot of people have this condition called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Some of these probiotics, like resistant starch that provides a food substrate for bacteria, and ideally this is occurring in the colon and not further north in the small intestine. People react wildly differently to this stuff. So it's really hard to say this is good, that's bad. Here's kind of an interesting thing. There's some great data that indicates that H. pylori is very beneficial if we are exposed to it as kids. But what's interesting is that most kids, I think there's a statistic here, that most kids by the age of 2 have gone through upwards of 4 rounds of antibiotics, which completely strafe bombs their gastrointestinal system. If they had a vaginal birth and received the microbiome from their mother, which theoretically what we're talking about here is the potential that you've been inheriting a microbiome that may be thousands or tens of thousands of years old and shifted forward generation to generation. We completely strafe bomb that, and then that stuff changes forever with the application of antibiotics. And clearly shit like tuberculosis and strep throat and stuff like that can kill people. So you want to use antibiotics selectively, but we're really changing our gut biome a lot. And what's very interesting is that adults that are exposed to H. pylori, it seems to increase the likelihood of peptic ulcers and also stomach and esophageal cancer. So it's not just a factor of, is this bug good or bad? There may be like a temporal element to it, where if you're exposed to it early, it may be beneficial. If that gets removed and then your immune system adapts to other things and you get exposed to it later, it could be negative. So, I mean, it is so fucking complex that I've almost just kind of dropped off of that bus and just kind of like stand on the sidelines and wait for people that are really knowledgeable on that to look into it. And even the people that are really, really knowledgeable about it, there's way, way, way more questions and answers on that story. So I mean, I would kick this one to just kind of the performance outcome. If you introduce fermented foods and your digestion is better, you're not so weird poops and farting and all that type of stuff, then it's probably a net win. If you get some bloating and GI problems after a week or two of fiddling with it, then maybe it's not a good fit. With kombucha, some people who have a mold allergy or intolerance, they can be cross-reactive to that. So I mean, it's all over the place, and John and I talk about this all the time, trying to figure out what our 80% kind of Pareto law story is to people, to get people most of the way there, and then we can start doing tweaking and customization. The tweaking and customization on the gut biome stuff is just confusing to me. Like, I really don't have, I feel like I understood all this stuff better 10 years ago than I do now.
Amen.
Like, I am way more fucking confused about all this stuff now than what I was 10 years ago.
Well, just to segue a little bit, when my little girls were born, they were both C-section because they were both breech, so C-section was the only way they were going to get out. And knowing a lot of this stuff that going through the vaginal birth, and obviously like the gut biota is different, and with those kids, we dosed them. From Matt Lalonde and also from Chris Kresser's recommendation, we found out that there was no way that we were going to be able to have a natural birth. Their deal was like, hey, you're going to have to really, one, avoid all antibiotics if you can, and then also dose those kids with a bunch of high-level probiotics from a fairly young age. So I had to actually sneak probiotics in when they were babies, and I was like basically putting on my finger trying to put it in their mouth when the doctors weren't around. But like using that type of stuff, I mean, it's been kind of a grind because you know about this, and yet when you go to the doctor, the first thing they do, oh, you have this, let me prescribe this. And I remember when the girls went in and were sick, they were all they wanted to do is prescribe antibiotics, and I'm like, you know what, like let's not do this. And I think we've given them one round of antibiotics, but knowing that they were C-section babies, they were going to have a different gut chemistry than obviously other kids. So, I mean, I know it's pretty in vogue right now to do C-section, but if you look at some of the stressors, and Rob can talk about this a little bit more about that, like that stressful situation of that child actually going through the birth canal actually sets a ton of the characteristics with not only everything from gut permeability, but also brain and all these other things that we just don't know. So people that are opting for this like voluntary C-section because it's easier, I kind of disagree with that and think, you know what, we don't really necessarily know what we're doing. We're messing with millions of years.
It's more expensive, and that
Well, I mean, there's a lot of. I mean,
people think that's big business.
Well, no, I mean
surgery.
When we were in the hospital, there were a ton of women that had opted for the voluntary C-section.
They're like, oh, my dad's birth date is this date. Little Johnny will be born on the same day as Grandpa, Yeah.
Or I don't want to go through childbirth, so I'm going to just have a surgery and have it over really quickly. And there's a lot of women that have done that. And when we were in the ICU, or when we were in recovery, there were two things that the nurses were completely amazed by. One of them was natural twins. Like the nurses kept coming in and they were like, oh my God, we heard it was natural twins. And I remember finally after like the third nurse came in, I'm like, what the fuck? And she's like, well, we haven't seen natural twins in so long because of obviously artificial insemination, and they put in 2 eggs, and a lot of the twins that they got is from that. So that was kind of a big deal. And then the other one is they were like, oh, it was a non-voluntary C-section. So there were a ton of the women had been doing voluntary C-section. So pretty interesting that, here we are, we think we're getting real jiggy with it, and it turns out we're actually messing up some of the evolution.
Well, I'm glad
I was going to say I'd never heard of that before. Both of my girls were born vaginally, and you're saying that just that act alone, it alters their gut chemistry?
Well, it populates them with a flora from their mother in a completely different way than from a C-section, and it appears to be incredibly beneficial for the child to go through that vaginal birth process, both with regards to epigenetic signaling, like John alluded to, like it's turning on all that stress process of being born turns on a whole bunch of genes, and we have no idea exactly what's going on other than just looking at kind of long-term health outcomes. And so there's maybe you could make the argument for like a hormetic stress response there at the beginning of life. And then also there's this other piece that the child gets populated with a completely different type of gut and surface biota that also appears to be very, very beneficial.
That's so interesting. Well, would that ever happen again? Like if they, as a child, reaches puberty, would their gut chemistry be altered again, or is that just kind of at birth? And
well, I mean, you get populated with it at birth, and then this stuff shifts and changes throughout a lifetime, like based off the type of food you're eating. If you get exposed to antibiotics, there's a pretty good bet that chlorinated water dramatically alters our gut microbiota. So I mean, there's a lot of different factors in there, and this is all the cost-benefit story that we have to play with modern life. If we don't treat our water with chlorine, then there's a pretty good bet that everybody's going to be running around with dysentery because in most places, like all you guys in LA, you guys are drinking the toilet water from everybody north of the state with you. You know, it's gone in and out of multiple toilets by the time you guys get it, and so you've got to treat the stuff, and that's just kind of the way it is. But there's what I think we're finding on like the degenerative disease side of this story is that there's, you know, sleep, food, movement, photoperiod, and gut flora or flora in general considerations that our modern life is starting to mess with, and there's clearly upsides to this stuff, but there's also some potential downsides when we start looking at autoimmune disease, asthma, and things like that. You know, we're not tuning the immune system in the same way that we've been kind of evolved to get that early tuning. Kids that are raised on a farm tend to have far fewer allergies and you know, kind of autoimmune type diseases. Kids that are raised with a lot of animals tends to be the same story, because they're getting a constant they're getting outside inputs that tune the immune system. So you know, it's not just that this is good or bad, but oftentimes what this is keeping the immune system within the right parameters. You don't want too much, you don't want too little. If you're too little, you're immune compromised and you develop something like AIDS. If you have too much, then you're autoimmune and you're hyperreactive to everything in your environment. So you want kind of the right balance between those things. And we're doing a lot of things that appears to be messing with that balance.
Rob and I were in, we took the kids up and visited Rob not too long ago, a couple months ago, and we had the opportunity to take the girls to this kind of, I don't know, what was that, like the petting zoo / Halloween kind of like hayride deal. And we put the girls on, and they got to ride on the back of these horses. And as soon as they got off, Kate goes over to spray like antibacterial stuff on their hands, and I was like, no, and she's like, what? I'm like, no, let them suck on their, like, we want this. And she was like, what are you talking about? And then Rob like explained it a little bit, and like the look on her face was like the mother who's been like, you know, like yeah, well, like, I mean, it's just what you do, because like they fucking put everything in their mouth, and it's just like, oh god. But like they were like there, and like Kate like ran over to like hit him with the, I was like, whoa, you know, stop it up. And then like later in the car, like Rob explains it a little bit, and Kate was like, oh, okay, well that makes sense. And
well, the really good one is when all the girls were feeding the goats, and the goats are just like licking and slobbering all over their hands, and they have basically goat slobber from their elbows down to their fingertips.
Goats are.
He was like, "Do we need to wash our hands?" I'm like, "Absolutely not."
Yeah,
you know,
they're so sweet.
I mean, yeah, like Louis will go over, like, because the girls are obviously, well, they've grown taller now, but like Louis still at like their height, so he goes over and like licks them in the mouth all the time if they're eating something.
Louis is a dog.
Yeah, Louis. Well, everybody. Yeah, Louis is my pit bull. And like the funniest part is the girls like scream at him. They're like, "No, Louis, don't lick me in the mouth." And Kate like looks at me. I'm like, "Dude, it's good. Like I don't know what he's eating out there, but hopefully he gets it in there and gives him a little bit of you know, adaptation."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Rob, I wanted to equip some of our coaches who listen to the podcast, and you know, one of the big issues and the big sort of myths that lie in nutrition is the big cholesterol myth, and you know, the science that surrounds that. And you know, when people hear of cholesterol, or they go and they get their cholesterol tested, do they really know what they're looking at, and do they know, you know, how much can be altered by diet, how much is really genetic? And I wanted you to kind of give your, you know, 5-10 minute, like when someone approaches you about cholesterol, like, oh, I can't have that, my cholesterol's high. You know, like how do you breach that subject with people, because it happens to be like a really personal thing for people for some reason, and you know, they make huge diet changes. I know people personally who've become vegetarians because of it, and really like changing their diet. It wasn't the meat necessarily. It was all the other shit that they were eating too that was causing crazy insulin responses, etc. So, I mean, how do you kind of couch that with athletes and coaches?
Oh man, you know, it's a big meaty topic. I mean, the cholesterol story goes back to probably the 1940s, 1950s. Some researchers fed like just whole cholesterol to rabbits. You know, they chemically isolated this cholesterol, fed it to rabbits. The rabbits developed atherogenic disease profiles, and so that was a piece of kind of a smoking gun story. And then there's another genetic condition called familial hypercholesterolemia, where these people have very, very high cholesterol levels, and they tend to die early from atherosclerotic disease progression. And so this is kind of where this idea that cholesterol causes heart disease came from. But what's always been interesting is that maybe 40% of people on any given day, if they have a heart attack or a stroke, they have low normal cholesterol levels. And clearly some people with high cholesterol levels have atherogenic disease process. Some people with high cholesterol levels do not have atherogenic disease process. Some people with very low cholesterol levels have atherogenic disease process such that they actually die from it. So, this thing's been kind of all over the map as far as that goes. And I'll launch down this. It gets a little bit technical, but
that's fine.
Cholesterol is a molecule that's critical to our life. All of our cell membranes have cholesterol that improves the membrane fluidity, and it's a energy medium in the body. People are usually familiar with HDL cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, and one of them gets labeled good, and one gets labeled bad.
It protects the cells, right?
It protects the cells. I mean, it's critical for all. Our body can and does manufacture cholesterol, so we don't necessarily need dietary sources of it. Typically, when we consume dietary cholesterol, our body downregulates the production of cholesterol. It's usually pretty tightly regulated. But here's an interesting thing: science tends to test what is easy to look at, and for a very, very long time, what we looked at was this stuff called cholesterol. But cholesterol doesn't float around our circulatory system in a free fashion. It's bound up in these things called lipoproteins. And we have a huge variety of lipoproteins, VLDL lipoproteins, HDL lipoproteins, LDL lipoproteins. And these lipoproteins are a protein-lipid combination that the protein part dissolves in aqueous medium, in our plasma, and then the lipid portion it allows cholesterol and cholesterol-like lipids to be associated in that. And so it's basically kind of like a soap bubble that allows you to float something through a water medium, even though this thing is an oil-type substance and wouldn't normally float through the body. So lipoproteins, though, are kind of hard to discriminate one versus the other. They've historically been pretty hard to characterize. But the thing to really take away here is that what we are always looking at on a standard blood test is cholesterol. But that's merely an analog for, it's representative of what's going on with the lipoproteins, but not an exact measure. And so what we've developed more recently is an NMR technique for looking directly at lipoproteins. And part of it, and here's a way to think about this stuff. The lipoproteins are a car. The cholesterol is a passenger in the car. So if we think about this, what's dangerous if we're driving on the road when we have 100 cars on a mile stretch of road, or when we have 1,000 cars on a mile stretch of road? Clearly the 1,000 cars, but the amount of passengers allocated within those vehicles doesn't really matter all that much. And then if we have a bus, which is a very large vehicle, we can pump a whole bunch of people around, and we really only have one additional vehicle on the roadways. And it's a pretty good analogy that works with cholesterol and lipoproteins. And so when I started doing this work here with this group in Reno, looking at lipoproteins in police, military, and firefighters, we found that there were people who They came to us and they had what appeared to be low cholesterol levels, but they had very, very high, specifically LDL lipoprotein counts. And these are the cops and firefighters that are 35, 40 years old, go out on a call and die from a cardiac event. And this is called discordance, and it's missed by virtually every cardiologist, virtually every GP on the planet right now, because these people don't understand the difference between cholesterol and lipoproteins, and that the lipoproteins are really the driver of the atherogenic process. The greater the number of lipoproteins, the greater the likelihood of a disease process. And you can have two people, each of them with an LDL cholesterol of 100, but one of them can have a lipoprotein count of 800. Another person could have a lipoprotein count of 2,500. And so they would be completely missed on standard blood work, One of them is at a very high risk for cardiovascular disease. The other one is at a very low risk for cardiovascular disease. Then there's another type of discordance where you have somebody that has high cholesterol levels but very low lipoprotein count. And those people are put on a statin, which is completely inappropriate given the fact that they actually have very, very low likelihood of cardiovascular disease developing. And, one thing that we do generally tend to see is that someone with metabolic derangement, insulin resistance, they tend to have high cholesterol and high lipoprotein counts due to elevated insulin shutting down the enzyme HMG-CoA reductase, which is involved in cholesterol synthesis and basically it regulates whether or not we're producing cholesterol. And when insulin levels are high, we start producing more cholesterol and more lipoproteins. So this is one of the reasons why we do like to keep insulin within pretty tightly regulated levels, and this is why generally people who are obese and insulin resistant, if we put them on a lower carbohydrate diet, we tend to see a dramatic improvement in lipoproteins and cholesterol levels. But not everybody who eats a low-carb diet ends up getting a really beautiful lipoprotein count. We're not 100% sure on that stuff. For myself, I had kind of an eye-opening experience. I went on this Discovery Channel reality show, I Caveman, and they did a really thorough physical before we went on there. And unfortunately, they didn't check my lipoproteins, but they did do a standard blood work, and my cholesterol levels and general lipid profile had always been very, very good. Went on that show, got my balls kicked through the roof of my mouth on that thing. I starved for 10 days, lost 18 pounds, got the first gray hairs I've ever had after that thing. And for probably a year and a half, 2 years after that, I was just broken, and we couldn't really figure out what was going on. Went in and got my lipoproteins checked, and my LDL-P was 2,600, which is very, very high. And when we started doing some poking around then on my cortisol and thyroid, and this is a really important point too, my thyroid panel from a standard medical practitioner's perspective looked okay, but my TSH had gone up 3 times from what its normal baseline was. Jesus. So even though it was within normal bounds, it had increased by a factor of 3 for me, and I was clearly having, and my reverse T3 was on the high side, and when you have low thyroid activity, then your LDL receptor sites are not functioning properly, and that's what clears LDL particles out of your system. So we got into some aggressive adrenal and thyroid fixes. I really dialed my coffee intake back. I quit going out on the road. I made sleep a huge priority. Unfortunately, I had our first daughter right around that time, so that definitely that put a little bit of a challenge on this stuff. But 2 years later, my TSH is now below what it was on my first reading that I had a number of years ago, and now my LDL-P, it was 2,600 2 years ago, and now it's 800. And my cholesterol levels have also plummeted. I forget what it was. It was like LDL cholesterol was like 185 or something, and now it's like 90 or something like that, like quite low.
That's a very, very good explanation. That's exactly what I was shooting for.
Rob, and also like a lot of this, I remember us sitting at Master John's talk at AHS when he really went into that whole deal with lipoproteins, and that was if anybody wants to check that out, that was pretty fascinating too.
Yeah, it's in my opinion, it's kind of malpractice at this point to run standard blood work in the absence of having an LDL particle count attached to it. Like it's all it does. Like even if the individual looks pretty, this is what I guess I'll throw a caveat in there. If we have somebody that if we did a health risk assessment on them and their family history was clear of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, if they're based off of their triglyceride to HDL ratio, they're insulin sensitive, then I could make an argument that a standard blood panel is probably enough for those people. But we have enough people that they have some cardiovascular disease in their family, they have some diabetes in their family, they might be a little bit insulin resistant, and so when they run that basic blood work, all it does is create more questions. And this is why I'm kind of deluged with people that are like, dude, I just got my blood work back, my cholesterol's a little high, should I be scared? And we can't answer that. It is a guess. based off of that level of blood work. And in my opinion, cardiologists and GPs that are putting people on statins based off that blood work, they're really doing a huge disservice to folks because, one, they don't know if it's really appropriate, and two, there's a massive number of issues that can drive particle count up. Gut dysbiosis, absolutely, it influences LDL particle count in a negative fashion. So if somebody has small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, if they have gluten intolerance and that stuff isn't being addressed, they will have elevated LDL particle count. And then what the standard medical practice would do is stick this person on a statin, which the statin is increasing their likelihood of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases, and it's not addressing the fundamental cause. And we should be looking at cortisol issues, thyroid issues, and gut dysbiosis. And if we're not addressing that kind of functional medicine base, you're just completely shitting the bed on addressing this stuff in a rational fashion.
Just really quick, I don't know if this will be a quick answer, but how does gut dysbiosis cause, like scientifically, how does it cause that chain reaction of lipoprotein increases?
That's a really good question. So something that's learned and then immediately forgotten in maybe first year, second year medical school is that a state called sepsis, where we have an active bacterial infection in our system, that will actually cause our lipoprotein count and our cholesterol levels to plummet, because the lipoproteins, not only do they shuttle energy through the body, but they also act as a complement of or an element of our innate immune response. And when we say, like, if somebody has an E. coli infection, the E. coli, the bacterial coat that surrounds it, sheds this stuff called lipopolysaccharide, and every vertebrate known, if it gets exposed to lipopolysaccharide, it's a pyrinogen, it basically a fever-inducing agent, it causes all kinds of inflammation. The body kind of freaks out, because if we have an active infection, we have really serious stuff going on. And what happens initially in an acute infectious situation is that lipoproteins drop precipitously, cholesterol drops precipitously, because these lipoproteins attach to lipopolysaccharide and cause it to be less toxic to the liver, and it causes it to be less toxic to the rest of the system. Mm-hmm. And so it can allow us to clear that bacterial load without going into... Another interesting side note with that, the way that people die from sepsis looks like completely uncontrolled diabetes. Blood glucose levels are high, the ability to control blood volume is dramatically compromised, the liver is pumping out glucose even though the blood glucose levels are elevated. We're pumping out triglycerides into the system. So the difference between acute sepsis and uncontrolled diabetes, it's very difficult to tell the difference between the two of these. But if we have a situation where we have a low-grade infectious situation, what happens is that the body knows that it's dealing with an infection. The lipoproteins drop initially, but then over the course of time, because the lipoproteins help in clearing this infection, the body starts upregulating the production of lipoproteins and cholesterol to aid in removing or dealing more effectively with that infection. So it's good from clearing the infectious agent, but it's bad from our cardiovascular risk parameters over the long haul. So it's another one of these evolutionarily conserved elements that really served us very well in the past when we dealt largely with acute infections. But when we have chronic infections due to gut permeability, then this is a really significant issue. Right. It's very sneaky. Yeah.
Interesting. That's awesome. Thank you for diving into that for me.
Yeah, super good question.
What else, John? What's going on in Reno? You guys want to touch on? Yeah. We did hear a bit about.
It's the blood work stuff is. I was sitting there just kind of looking something up for a second, but I mean we always get really confusing stuff, and I know this has happened to Rob, and it happens to me all the time. I mean, somebody tells you one thing, and then obviously it like for example, the other day a guy shot me with a question like, "Hey, I went to see the doctor, and in 24 months." Since I've been, following your diet stuff, my cholesterol's gone up. What should I do? And I'm like, what happened in the last 24 months? In the last 24 months, he ruptured his Achilles tendon. He couldn't walk. He had a kid. He got a new job. He literally named out these 30 things, and I'm like, so you think it was the diet, huh? like the guy like ruptured his Achilles, couldn't walk, rehab was going like shit, couldn't train, gained body fat, it was like a laundry list of things, and I'm like, it always blows me away that it's like, it's the diet when people don't realize a lot of these things are, other extraneous factors play, and it's lifestyle. But also, my other question is like, okay, so your cholesterol was high. What was your particle count? Well, I didn't get that test. What was your testosterone level? What was your fasted blood glucose? What was your insulin? Yeah. What was your thyroid? What was all this? And I was like, dude, historically, my blood sugar has always been a little high. My cholesterol has always been a little high. But my triglycerides are in the 60s and the 70s, and my insulin is like out of a count of like 7 to 25, my insulin is like a 7 or an 8 every time. So like the doctor's like, well, your triglycerides are low and your insulin's low, but your fasted blood glucose is a little elevated and your cholesterol is a little high. So it's like what we know, when Rob was talking about lipoproteins, if like you look at all these factors and it's like, but I also have 10 years of blood work that always has my fasted blood glucose a little high and my cholesterol is a little bit elevated. So, is it as basic as like, and I was telling Callie this, going back and looking at it, is it, fiber intake? Am I, on something like an anabolic diet where you're not necessarily consuming a lot of fiber as vegetables? Is it fiber a deal where, the stuff's not clearing the stomach? Like there's all these little key factors that you don't know unless you go in, like for something like Rob with the functional medicine and specialty health, and go in and have like people that are super sharp. The thing that kind of kills me a little bit with a lot of the doctors today is they went to med school and that was the information they were taught, and their learning has never really progressed. And I think what Rob's really doing, which is so revolutionary, is going in and looking at things as a complete system instead of just focusing on one thing. Oh, you got high cholesterol? Here's a statin. Well, let's figure out why he has high cholesterol. And I think Rob's taking the same approach to health, that we take to training. If somebody says to me, hey, or you go to a lot of people, I'm not very strong. Well, gain some body weight, you'll get stronger. Well, you just need to do this. No, we look at things in terms of a holistic approach, like, what does your training look like? What does your diet look like? What are all these key factors? If all of a sudden the training's not working and you're doing all the little things, you know what? Go get your blood work. Go get a physical. Figure out what's wrong. And, we had a guy recently doing the training, and he's like, I'll put on some body fat. Come to figure out that the guy's thyroid was a complete mess, and now he's doing things to fix his thyroid, but he's just about to have his third kid, works a full-time job. all these other factors. So I think people, see just one thing, and instantly they're like, okay, because of this, like, for the last 70 years since Ansel Keys' seven nation deal, high cholesterol, too much meat. It's like, oh, too much animal protein. And if you go to the doctor and your cholesterol's high, they're like, well, we're going to need you to cut back on dietary fats and animal proteins. And it's like, it's just I think we've been led astray. And if we hadn't, we wouldn't have this many sick people that are literally battling for their lives on a daily basis. When, Rob said it earlier in the podcast, it's your body doesn't want to get fat. Your body's more consumed with starvation. And, if you have some severe metabolic derangement, and we spot people all the time that have severe metabolic derangement, and, what's the key factor for it? More importantly, how do you play into it? And how do we fix it? It's not an easy question. It's not an easy process. It's not an easy answer.
No, and I feel like our clinic, we're doing a really good job relative to what we used to do on the functional medicine side, but compared to like a Chris Kresser or a Doc Parsley, we're still, honestly, the algorithms that we have put together are kind of in the infantile stage. So, and this is both, it's very exciting because I think the work that we can do can be even dramatically improved. But the flip side of that is that we're doing things relative to like Scripps or the Mayo Clinic or like, any average doctor's office that is like the difference between like rubbing two sticks together for fire versus like an atomic bomb. Like, and we're still not nearly where I want it to be, but there's not even a remote similarity between the type of medicine that's going on at our clinic and what 99.999% of physicians are practicing in Western world.
That's crazy.
It is, but it's a huge opportunity, not to
that's why we talk about this stuff all the time. Rob and I, this is, bi-weekly, tri-weekly conversation that Rob and I have where it's like, there's so much need for this information. And, and we go through it all the time. I mean, we just did our 3-year-old checkup with the girls, and like, it was amazing to sit in there and like listen to all the information, like comparison with other kids and what they do. And I remember the doctor asking questions like, do you exercise? Was one of the questions the doctor asked the girls, and they were like, yeah, we go to gymnastics, they go to swimming, they do all these things, and they're like, so what do you eat? And Kelly's like, I like meat. Meat's my favorite food. And Jamie's like, I like meat. And like, it just was pretty interesting. And like, both the girls were like, I think Jamie was like 100 in height, 90 in weight. Kelly was like 90 in height, 85 in weight, and like just like all these things. And the doctor was like, wow, they're really progressing and smart. And she's like, I really have not had a little kid tell me that they like meat. And I'm
right.
like, I mean, and then she's like, you guys don't come visit us. We've had 1 round of antibiotics. Like, they're still after me to finish up all their immunizations. But I went with like the 1976, which was the same immunizations that I got. So I went back and looked at 76, and that's what the girls got, and they were kind of on me about that. But I'm like, well, if I made it this far, my girls will make it this far. So, but it's amazing to hear, like, kind of, because I think we're so insulated, at least, because like who are the other dads I talk to, like, Rob and Doc Parsley and all my other friends. Everybody's kind of in this deal, and you kind of forget that there's like this whole other world out there where people like, it's like corn chips and Fritos and Diet Cokes and
Stop it! I'm so hungry.
How it fits in.
The pizza now, Papa John's,
Yeah.
Fritos on your chili cheese pizza.
I mean, so that type of stuff. I mean,
night
You did.
before your taco. So it's good and it's refreshing. So.
Rob, what else is going on for you in 2015? You got any other projects going on?
The whole push is.
Hello?
Oh no.
We have dramatically increased our reach within police, military, and fire. We have a contract with the ATF. We have a contract with the Army. We've been out to Quantico presenting to the FBI a bunch of times, which has been really cool, and I think that we're close to getting a contract with those folks. But, the game plan is to roll this out to the masses, to have idea. I'm really kind of looking at the Apple Store model. I'd like about 250 to 300 clinics within about 2 to 3 years that use this type of methodology. And if we place these things in the right locations, again, similar to the Apple Store model, 85 to 90% of the population in the United States will be within a 20-minute drive of a clinic that knows what the fuck it's doing. And, so that's really the big push with all this stuff, is getting this risk assessment program totally buttoned up and put together, creating in addition to offering the blood work and the risk assessment itself, then we have a certification for both strength coaches and healthcare providers. I really want a network and a system where, currently your clients go to a doctor and typically the doctor gives them one story, and then they go back to you guys as coaches and you get a different story. And what we're going to do with this system is everybody's going to be certified and credentialed within this program, great quality control, and everything's going to be on the same page, and we're going to have some synergy within that, so that when somebody goes to the gym and they're talking to their coach, we're getting the same story and the same type of messaging that we're getting out of the healthcare providers.
Yeah,
so we have some synergy with that.
That's great.
And that's everything, man. That is that, and raising 2 kids and trying to keep motoring at old dude jiu-jitsu. That's the whole fucking thing. That's all of it.
Well, that sounds like an ambitious year. That sounds exciting, though. Very, very cool. Is there anywhere that people could go currently to get information on what the project?
I've done a couple of things. If they do Robb Wolf risk assessment as a search term, they'll find the 3 blog posts I did on that. But, I've honestly quit talking about it as much as I did before, because we have not had a really seamless online interface where we can deal with people. Like, we pump a number of people through our brick and mortar location here locally, but the thing is not set up to be able to, press play and pump 10,000 people through it today, and that's really what we're working towards, and we're hoping to have all of those systems hammered out by about May or June.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I can totally appreciate that because of the complexity of what you guys are working with. You want to put something out there that you're sure, I mean, shit, we've gone through several websites. We know how difficult it is. You want an interface that is just going to represent, your brand and represent what you have to offer and make sure it's integrated.
Yeah, and, more than anything else, the goal is that, like, if you guys sent your parents or grandparents to the site, they got their blood work, when they get the report, the detailed report and the prescriptive elements should be so easy to understand, so easy to implement that it doesn't then create a phone call to you guys or to me that's like, hey, I just got my blood work, what does this mean? Like, because I get that all the time, people go out and get blood work and then they have no fucking idea what it means. The goal with this is that, with a reasonably intelligent person, 5 minutes of reading the report, they will know what their risk profile is for, like, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, some types of cancers, and they will know an action plan to move towards their goals, and that will not then require, additional input from someone like me or someone like you guys. And so that's the goal with this thing, and that's really going to be the gold standard that I hold this thing to if we succeed or fail on it. Like, I would call it a failure if somebody goes through the program and then they still need to get some sort of follow-up from someone, to be like, well, what does this mean? What does that mean?
Yeah, sort of giving them that empowerment, empowering them to kind of be proactive from the get-go. That's
absolutely.
That's yeah. Well, I don't really have much more. If you guys if you have anything else you want to touch
on. I had a question. I don't know what that iCaveman show is, just kind of backing up. So I was curious, Rob, when you were talking about that, if was it just the fact that you lost that weight, 18 pounds, like relevant to like your height and age, that fucked you up so bad, or were you restricted to certain foods that messed you up? I mean,
we didn't have any food.
We didn't have anything.
We were dropped off outside of.
Yeah, explain it, Rob. I was going to say, take him through like what happened because it's a pretty epic story.
So I was shot this thing from the Discovery Channel, and they're like, hey, would you be interested in doing this reality show? It's called iCaveman. We basically give you guys some training, and you get a couple of experts in things like primitive skills usage, like stone tools and stuff. But it's going to be a mixed bag. Some people from like LA, a couple of people that are kind of survival experts. We drop you off somewhere, and you need to live for. Originally, it was going to be 6 weeks out in the boondocks, and originally what they said is that it was going to be Tennessee or North Texas. And I was like, oh, fuck, that's a slam dunk. There's armadillos and scorpions.
I'm suddenly thinking of, like, Deliverance or something if you're out in the woods.
Close, but those areas have a lot of food, like, year-round. Like, it's not that hard to forage for food. So I was like, yeah, I'll give this thing a shot. And then we were maybe 2 weeks out from the thing going, and then they shot us an update, and they were like, so, yeah, it's not going to be North Texas. It's going to be Colorado. And this was happening the first week of June, and this area in Colorado was still under, like, 4 feet of snow. And so I was like, I'm going to fucking starve. Like, there's not going to be anything to eat. So I almost bailed on it, but my wife was like, dude, when are you ever going to get an opportunity to do this? It'll be awesome. Go do it. And it was awesome in a lot of ways, but they dropped us off out in the middle of nowhere. We were given some, period piece clothes that basically, like Native Americans would wear, and what we'd found in, anthropological sites indicative of hunter-gatherer garb. And we had some chert and some flint, and everything was cold and wet. Daytime highs were in the 40s. Nighttime lows were in the low 20s. The first night that we were there, it snowed and, sleeted, snowed, and rained. We managed to get a fire started. I actually got the fire started on day one because I'm a coward, and I knew that getting a fire started was going to be really hard. For 3 weeks, I practiced like 5 hours a day building a fire kit from stone tools because I'm a coward and I don't like to suffer. So I practiced ahead of time. And even with that said, because every single stitch of grass and wood and twigs was wet because it had been under snow 2 weeks previously, it was a bastard to get the fire going. So we got the fire going. We started trying to forage around and find stuff. We were at an elevation. We were at 8,500 feet in Steamboat Springs in early June, and there was just no food there. There were no crustaceans, there were no fish, there were no salamanders, there were no frogs, there was nothing. And over the course of time, we built some atlotls, and we had some near misses getting some elk. And then on day 10, we actually had a very small camera crew, which is part of the reason why we succeeded. The earlier hunting expeditions had a full camera crew with them, and they ended up making all kinds of noise and cast all kinds of scent and everything, and so they kind of fucked that up. But on day 10, I killed a 650-pound elk with a hand-thrown spear, and nice. I ate its liver about 20 minutes after that. But
well, you have to.
That is the most badass thing.
Smear the blood on your face, dance around.
Well,
I mean, that's
let Rob tell you, let Rob preface this that they went back and they have what's the registry for animals taken down? It's like the Lewis and
the Lewis and Clark deal. So like there's a what's the largest animal ever taken with a .22 long rifle? What's the largest animal ever taken with like a .270 Remington rifle or whatever? And then they have it in archery and all this stuff. And apparently there is a registry on this with an atlotl, and apparently I still have the world record on the largest land animal taken with an atlotl, and what they think may be since like the late Paleolithic. Like there's never been a larger animal taken with an atlotl.
Oh my God!
Robb Wolf took
that's cool, dude.
With a hand, and if you Google, it's like basically it's like a big lawn dart. And he took this thing down, and like that's the biggest animal that's been taken down since.
I'm not gonna bullshit you. I don't care about all of your infamy and all your accolades. That is the coolest thing about you. I don't care.
How far? Hang on, let's get.
Yeah, thank you.
Is this point blank or?
You gotta get technical. Yeah, like are you hiding?
It was a 35 to 40 yard shot, and
that's pretty impressive.
I cannot believe I was wasting all that time talking about cholesterol.
That's hard enough to do with a bow.
He got it in the neck, didn't he? Get it in the neck.
You got a dart. You got a dart.
Oh, it's
the dart. Imagine an arrow that's about 7 feet long, and it has a giant flint tip on the end, and you've got a highlight launcher that you hold in your hand that generates some leverage and stores some kinetic energy in the thing. The first throw that I hucked at it went high and went over its hip, but because we were downwind and with the sun behind us, the animals couldn't smell us and they couldn't see us, but this dart goes sailing over it silently, essentially, and the animals picked their heads up and looked, and they're kind of like, something's a little up, but it wasn't anything super disturbing for them. And then I was going for the second shot, and I only had 2 darts, and I was definitely the best positioned person there. Morgan Spurlock, actually, who from Super Size Me, he was on the show. He threw his 2 darts, and he hit an animal twice in the ass with it, but he threw them without sufficient force, and they just bounced off. So he actually hit the same animal twice, but it didn't do anything with them. So, and it's a really weird thing. Like, you want to throw these things hard, but you have to throw them smooth. Otherwise, they basically, you huck it as hard as you can, and it goes 6 feet in front of you and sticks in the ground. So, again, because I'm a coward, the 3 or 4 weeks before I went and did this thing, I made an atlotl by hand, both the launcher and the atlotl darts. And when I wasn't practicing making fire, I was practicing with my atlotl deal. So I actually was reasonably good with this thing, but the first shot went high over the hip. The second shot I was aiming for its front shoulder, and that went a little high, and it hit it in the neck. And because this thing is 7 feet long, when the animal would try to put its neck down, it would basically jam the dart up into its carotid artery, and it severed the carotid artary, and it ended up bleeding out pretty quickly. So,
and then you guys butchered it with stone tools, which is even better.
The entire thing with stone tools.
So they got us literally homemade stone tools, and then they skinned it, and Rob got in there. But I just trip out the fact that Robb Wolf took down the largest land animal since Paleolithic era in fucking North America.
With an atlotl.
With a fucking atlotl. With a fucking atlotl.
I don't know what an atlotl is.
Because I like to say I've taken down some animals.
I'm
So
and I'm talking
ladies.
Just know that I have had the opportunity to hunt with Robb Wolf, and there's a reason that Rob's nickname is the Harbinger of Death. So last year about this time, Rob and I went on a hunting trip, and I'll just say that Rob's nickname was fucking Harbinger of Death. Like, he brings it. Yeah. Like, I've never in my life, like, we pulled up and we're like, are those all your animals?
So I'm looking at an atlatl right now, and for anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's basically a
lawn dart.
Yeah, it's like I've never seen a lawn dart, though. It's like a spear with sort of just like a slight attachment. It's like not mechanical, really.
It's a sling around the end, and you propel it.
Yeah, this is amazing. Wow, I don't think we can top that story. That's about the best thing I've heard ever.
So not only is Rob the paleo guy, he's also the fucking hunter
and also down. My personal hero.
And pretty good with a 270. So.
Oh, thank you. Hey, here's a possibly little interesting sideline with that whole story. So we had literally starved for 18 days, and they had some anthropologists there, or not 18 days, 8 days up until this point, 8 to 10 days. They were estimating that with the firewood gathering that we were doing, collecting water, and trying to hunt, and also I got reasonably good at putting together these Paiute deadfall traps, trying to catch mice and other little critters, but there just literally were none of them out. I don't think any of them were out of their burrows yet. But they estimated we were burning probably about 4,500 calories a day. And like the only things that we were eating it was greens. Like we had greens. There were a couple of tiny little snails that we found on some trees. We caught one frog. We caught like two fish between 10 people. But for all intents and purposes, we starved for 10 days. So we killed this animal, and I was just getting ready to start eating the liver on this thing, and I was like, everybody stop. And they're like, what's up? And I'm like, we did blood work before the show, and then we had to do blood work after the show. But I was like, we have to do blood work now because it's going to skew things after we've eaten. We need to do blood work now, and then we need to do blood work at the end of the show. And so we had to wait another 4 hours to eat because that's how long it took us to haul all the shit back to camp. And when they were taking my blood glucose level, they took it like 6 times. Normal blood glucose levels are like, 85 to 90, maybe 80 or so. Most people start feeling hypoglycemic if it gets down in the 70s. My blood glucose was 33.
Wow.
Because I was in a starvation keto adaptation. I actually went into that whole thing keto adapted because I knew we were going to starve, and so I ate like crazy. I actually gained some body fat eating ketogenically, which that kind of answers one of those questions. Can you gain body fat on a ketogenic diet? Yes, you can if you do it the way that I did. But I knew that we were going to starve, and the process of starvation the first 3 days is basically entering into ketosis. So I started in ketosis, so I didn't have that whole fucked up period that the other folks had the first couple of days.
Yeah.
But the doctors were stupefied that my blood glucose was that low. And other people had kind of lowish blood glucose, like 60 and stuff like that. But mine was usually in starvation ketosis, when they monitor blood glucose, it doesn't get that low until somebody's been starving for like 20 days. But again, I kind of primed the pump with the ketogenic diet before going into that.
Well, you just do everything better than
no, Callie, here's the deal. I'm a coward and don't like to suffer, so I.
Your humility is very nice, but that's an amazing feat. What a cool experience, and probably one you wish you would never have again. So.
No way, dude.
It's a funny thing. I mean, if you had somewhat consistent food, it was amazing because you didn't have any multitasking. When you got up in the day, you had like, okay, I'm going to do this, and if it takes me 6 hours, it takes me 6 hours, and you just chipped away at it. And I never played professional sports. I was never in like the SEALs or anything, but people talking to John, talking to the dudes in the teams, that camaraderie that you get from being with people that close, like it was crazy. Like 1 minute, literally, I would be so angry with someone, I wanted to fucking kill them. I mean, just like blind rage. And then 2 minutes later, we would be rolling on the ground laughing. And the unfortunate thing is that the way that they edited this whole thing, it was just like whatever drama was there, that's all that was carried out. And there was a lot of really touching, funny shit that happened that never made it into the main show. But it was really appealing in some ways. Like if you had a stable food source, but you didn't have to fuck around with email and social media, I was like, this is money. So,
yeah. That's super cool. Well, we'll link that up and see if people can look at clips and stuff. That's super cool.
Nice.
Well, I think, guys, we've run as we usually do with Rob, which we lovingly do, is run way over.
So we're through the intro. What's next?
So we might make this a two-parter, maybe just a one-parter, but either way, so much good information here, Rob. We can't thank you enough for joining us again.
Thanks, guys. Huge honor being on. I really, really enjoy it. You guys are doing great work.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks.
Yeah, I guess if there's no one, like, this might be a possibility. Like, Rob just scratched the tip of a lot of the stuff he has on his site. Like, go to his site, go to his blog. There's tons and tons of information.
Listen to his
there.
podcast.
Rob probably has one of the deepest archives of the blog. Like, if there's anything nutrition related or training or anything, I usually just enter whatever I want. Robb Wolf.
Yeah.
And
there's
be like
3
in
articles.
2007 there was a 27-part series on this, and I'm like things that I actually, before I used to just call Rob on the phone, I'm like, hey Rob, explain this to me. And then I actually just started Googling his site, and then when I call him, I'm like, hey, I was dealing with this, and I talked to him. He's like, oh, yeah, I worked on that. I'm like, yeah, I already read it, dude. So, like, Rob, and then he has an incredible podcast, which I've been fortunate to be on a couple times, and has incredible guests, and really from everything from, like, psychology to performance, to food, to athlete. I mean, Rob is a really, really deep pull for people. So
I know that our podcast can be like sort of all over the place, but we have 50% substance, 50% like fluff. But I can't help but say like Rob's podcast is at least 90% actual substance. So if anybody's looking for something dense and really, really informative, check it out for sure.
And just to let folks know, the one and only forum that I spend any time on the interwebs is the Power Athlete Forum. So if you haven't signed up for the Power Athlete Field Strong program, get on it.
That's amazing. I'm going to use that soundbite.
Well, no, it's true. Like Rob will come in there and just drop people, and like I know they're like people are reading it, and they're like, holy shit, I can't believe Robb Wolf is on here, and I'm like, It's cool. I'm stoked that Rob gets on there, and definitely. It's
the only forum on the internet worth being on.
Yeah. Yes, that's my new ringtone. Power Athlete HQ. That's amazing. Well, the UPS truck is doing wheelies out front right now, very loudly. So we're gonna cut it here, guys. Again, thanks again, and we'll speak to everyone next week.
Awesome. Take care, guys.
See you. Thanks. Bye. See you, Robert.
Don't forget to head over to Rob's website, robbwolf.com, for more content and resources than you could ever imagine. Oh, and check out his podcast, The Paleo Solution. I have, and I can tell you firsthand, it is highly informative and just another great nutrition and training resource. 2015 is here, and that means that CrossFit Football is setting sail for a city near or near-ish you. Don't forget to go to www.crossfitfootball.com/events to see when the crew will be heading your way. We're still adding to the list of locations, so be patient as dates and locations are being updated regularly. And why aren't you on the Field Strong program yet? You heard it from the source.
The one and only forum that I spend any time on the interwebs is the Power Athlete Forum.
Visit www.powerathletehq.com for more information on membership, programming, and, of course, our forums. Remember, Robb Wolf is waiting for you on the other side.
Just standing here in my underwear.
Speaking of underwear, Valentine's weekend has arrived, and that means swag sales. As promised, we will be discounting our apparel and outfitting you and your sweetheart/training partner/ inflatable companion with the latest Power Athlete fashion. Take advantage of the savings all weekend at shop.powerathletehq.com. Until next week, bye!